So here we go. On behalf of Bryant's Alumni Association, welcome everyone to the first of a series of webinars designed to share alumni professional expertise with graduates and students. Before I turn the program over to our presenter, Mohammed Al Suwayed, and our facilitator, Vince Ma, I need to provide you with some ground rules for today's webinar, which will last for about an hour. All participants are in a listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to comment and ask questions using the question and answer feature located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. After today's presentation, you'll receive a survey. Take a moment to provide your feedback, as your comments are valuable as we expand our professional development programs for alumni. Now at this time, I'm going to turn the program over to Vince Ma, a graduate student here at Bryant University.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks everyone for joining us today. At this time, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mohammed Alsuwayed. Currently, Mohammed is an advisor of the Deputy Ministry for Strategic Planning and the Transport Ministry in Saudi Arabia. He holds an MBA from Bryant and has worked for several companies in Saudi as an asset management professional and financial advisor. His latest positions were head of capital and money market at Adeem Capital and strategic planning consultant at MODON. He's also a columnist at the Riyadh newspaper and has been on several TV shows, including Bloomberg TV. Mohammed will also be on the Smithfield campus on Wednesday, May 24th, for the 32nd Annual World Trade Day, a day-long event which allows attendees to hear from international business professionals and then learn more about global business trends. For more information, please visit bryant.edu/TV Center. And with that, I'm happy to turn the microphone over to Mohammed for today's presentation on Saudi Vision 2030 opportunities.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Vince, and thank you so much, Tim, for this introduction, for this webinar, for organizing and everything. I'm really excited to join you guys in Rhode Island and everywhere else that I've seen some of the subscribers from all over. And I'm so excited also to tell you today about some information about the Saudi vision and some of the business opportunity in Saudi, and also some of the, I would say, and on-the-ground information about the culture and some of the complications and some of the stuff that's been happening in Saudi. You've probably heard about it on the news, or you visited or done some research. So before we start, I'm going to show you what we're going to be talking about today. It's three stuff that we're going to be discussing: the vision's pillars, and a kind of a summary, a brief about some of the major characteristics of the vision. And then we're going to be talking about the business opportunities, which would be not just for people who work for companies. It would be also for probably for students or small and medium-sized companies, or even institutions, educational institutions or government institutions, to get in collaboration with Saudis. And the third would be, which would be the most interesting part of it, is the cultural transformation that we're anticipating within the next 10 years. And of course, it's all about women not being able to drive, which you would be surprised with some of the information that I would be sharing with you today that you probably have never heard of or have never encountered before. So before we go on with the presentation, I would like to run a small, tiny bit of a survey, if you would be able to join us here. And try to.
Yeah, I'm going to launch that poll. And
okay.
So the poll is launched, so everybody take a chance. And the question is, how much do you know about Saudi Arabia? A lot, a little, not much. And we'll give some time for people to vote.
Yeah.
So far, it's split between a lot and a little. Ooh, not much came over. Just give people a little bit more time to vote, and then we'll close it out and we'll share the results with everybody.
Beautiful. You would be surprised with some of the attendees who actually have been to Saudi or I mean, of course, they've probably heard, but if they've been to Saudi, that would be really surprising for them.
Which is great, which is great. All right, so I'm going to close this out, and then I'm going to share. And it looks like the folks are on here. Not surprised. They know a little bit about your country, Mohammed. It's 50%, and they know a lot. 25% a little, so 25% not much. So it'll be a learning experience for some.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. All right, so let's go on with our presentation. The first thing that we would like to talk about is the vision's pillar. It actually goes around three major things. It's, one is related to religion, because Saudi is considered the heart of the Muslim world, and the Arab world, of course. And it has the Mecca and Medina, the most holistic places. I mean, it's dear to all of the Muslims. And the second pillar is actually related to the potentials of the economy, related to investments, to resources, and also related to the sovereign fund that if we probably heard about it before, that Saudi is actually intending to sell Aramco in an IPO, and that would increase the value of the sovereign fund that's called PIF, Public Investment Fund. The Saudi sovereign fund would make its asset to go beyond $2 trillion. And when we say $2 trillion, that's $2 trillion, not real. And that's one of the things that is looking to Saudis, like creating or taking a really strategic direction into investment. And the third would be related to the logistics. I'm sorry about that. Or having Saudi be in let me just remove that a little bit. The strategic geographic position that connects all the continents, which translates into turning Saudi into a logistical hub. And if you look at Saudi, it's not just, when we talk about logistical hub, it's not just aviation or through sea. It's also through land, which is, we talk about road transportation and everything. So these are the major pillars of the vision that goes around it. And most of the goals, if you look at the website of the Saudi Vision 2030, you would learn more about it in detail, how it describes what the action plans are going to be used to fulfill those, to fulfill the vision, and also to achieve within the next 5 to 10 years also. So this is for the vision. Next, we're going to be talking about the business opportunities. If you look at the, I'm sorry, I'm just going to get this down. This is the first time that I ever try using a webinar, kind of like new to me here. So if we look at the business opportunities, there's like three major things at the moment that was supposed to get your attention if you're an international investor or even a local investor, which goes around housing market and the debt market and the PPP. What I mean by PPP is a public-private partnership. Part of it would be the privatization project and the process of selling some of the assets. But that's not the only deal, so that's not only programs that Saudi is actually looking to. But this goes all around the SMEs, and I'm going to explain to you how all these opportunities, including the sectors or the opportunities that I haven't really brought up, or I'm not going to really go into detail in this presentation. How all these goes around SMEs and how the SMEs is actually going to be the main influence in the Saudi economy in the future. First of all of these opportunities, and by the way, feel free to jump in and interrupt with a question or a comment during the presentation. When we talk about housing, there's one thing you should know about housing in Saudi. It has been subsidized for a very long time. There's in I think 20 or 30 years, a real estate investment fund was set up to provide loans. I wouldn't say like real mortgages. It was a mortgage, but it wasn't like one of those commercial mortgages. It was subsidized where interest rate was pretty low, or sometimes it's not, it doesn't exist in some of the contracts. And those would be like be provided based on first come first serve for those who apply to the fund. And during that time, there was no like kind of a mortgage regulation that was developed enough to accommodate the private sector providing mortgages as much as like similar to the one in the U.S. or Europe and some other parts of the world. So what happens during the past few years, the government decided to, I don't want to say privatize, but engage the private sector more into the housing sector, whether it's providing mortgages or even deal with the private sector to build the homes for the citizens, for the Saudis. And that actually started with approving the mortgage law in 2013, and then it was supposed to be followed by some policies and regulations to take place to set up certain entities to provide financing or refinancing, to work with the new mortgage industry dynamics to build it up slowly, gradually. So when we look at it today, the housing issue, actually, the housing, we call it like a crisis right now, because if you look at the left side here of the screen, you will see that as a 1.5 million approved mortgage application, and that's a huge number to be approved and not being met during the past few years. So this is like most of the application. Most of the mortgage applications in Saudi, and it's all being driven through the Ministry of Housing. And some of those, or most of it actually, is still subsidized in terms of the interest rate or the interest that they pay. But the rest of it is what the government is trying to transform the mortgage industry to become more commercialized and less dependent on subsidies. So if you look at it right now, this is like one of those attractive characteristics of the industry that today we have like 1.5 million approved applications for mortgage. And of course they vary for the amount of mortgage starts from $100,000 and goes up to say 500 or even more than that. But mainly it's, in Saudi riyals, it starts with 500,000. And if we would estimate the market size for that in the next 10 years, it would go beyond 1 trillion. And, all right. So that's for the market size. And then we'll look at the second column, middle here. You see that the government is trying to, let's say, push. I'm sorry. So the government is trying to push for having the private sector engaged with and providing the housing. So they passed several regulations, like in 2000, as I said like a moment ago about the mortgage law being passed in 2013. There was also what we call the general policies for real estate financing. It was approved again in 2015 and then being pushed through the pipeline to get approved, to get applied, and then have have it, enable the industry to operate. So they also approved the off plan and got it regulated, and that was started with a different government entity, and then it was it was moved to another entity, which is the Ministry of Housing, and now it's being used as part of the acceleration plans. Well, acceleration, I wouldn't say, because it's not really a subsidy, but accelerating regulations that the government put up with another center that's called Itimam. The other center that works with the off-plan center, works to make the building permits process faster than it's being regularly passed. For example, nowadays, before these new regulations, a building permit for a big project could take up to a year or two, but with this one, they actually shortened it to as much as 90 days. We're talking about 3 months mostly. And also, they kind of improved the FDI regulation to make it easier for foreign investors to get in. And it's not completely set up perfectly so far for the FDI, but it's so much better than it used to be, and they're improving it as we go through the next, through the year and probably next year. But you don't know how fast Saudis or the Saudi government is moving, because since the change of the leadership, things are moving really fast with certain sectors and certain situations that needs more attention, which is something different that we've seen from the Saudi government. And then when we look at how the real estate sector, get financed, there's one of the things that were set up as part of the mortgage or the general policy of the real estate financing was setting up a refinancing company that's similar to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and this company is supposed to securitize all the mortgage, all the housing loans, and issue, I wouldn't say bonds, because bonds are not really complied with the Islamic principles about trade and stuff. So they would use sukuk, and there's so many types of sukuk they could use for this type of financing, and to generate more cash, more financing, provide more financing for the sector, whether it's for mortgage banks or for real estate developers and stuff. And the good thing about, and also with the other good thing that they have done to real estate financing, which is approve the REIT, the Real Estate Investment Trust regulations, and it's not just that; it's already been applied, and a couple of funds have already been approved and listed at Tadawul. So it's not just the regulation approved; it's already in action, and financial institutions in Saudi can actually use it today. So when we look at those two, that's actually helping the industry to kind of build up and start up to become more to be more able to provide the commercial mortgages. And then the last thing when we talk about the debt market, there's a regulation that I haven't mentioned so far. It's called the SPE regulation, Special Purpose Entities. They've already published it last year, and it's supposed to get approved really soon. And this is the regulation that will allow financial firms to start issuing sukuk and selling them to the public, maybe more efficient than it used to be. Although sukuk has been around here in Saudi for a while, but it's not as regulated as it's supposed to. So this new regulation, the SPE regulation, would enable it to enable the debt market to actually enter a growth stage. And when we talk about growth stage, within the next 10 to 20 years, the debt market in Saudi should go beyond 1 trillion riyal, not just because of the housing sector, it's also because of other entities that would need it, whether from private sector or even from the government itself to issue treasury, so we call it. So that's for the housing sector. If there is any questions or remarks about this section, feel free to jump in as we move into the next one. This would actually explain what the mortgage, industry or the mortgage market side looks like in Saudi and the U.S. So we can make the comparison to really have an idea of what to imagine of what would the debt market in Saudi would look like. At the left side, you would notice the U.S.'s outstanding mortgages are about $13.8 trillion. That's in 2015. Compared to the GDP, it's like about 70% of the GDP. While in Saudi, if you look at it, it's the GDP is 2.5 trillion. That's in Saudi riyals, of course. But if you look at the mortgages of like 186 billion, which is so much less than, not even more than 5% or 6% from the GDP. So if we're looking at it from one angle that it's supposed to be 70% of the GDP, that's for the GDP today. But if we look at how would that increase in debt market and the move in the housing sector would actually influence the economy and the GDP to even grow beyond the 2.5, maybe double or triple within the next 10 to 20 years. So I'd leave this to your imagination to think about, or maybe if you do the analysis of research, you'll find out more about it. And now we get to the second subject of today, which is the PPP. PPP in Saudi has started with the privatization, and as we remember, the most famous privatization case was with the STC, Saudi Telecom Company. The government sold about 30% of it, and it was a really successful privatization and project, and they made a lot of money. Everybody made a lot of money, whether the investors or the government or even the economy, because freeing the telecom sector from the government monopoly made it easier actually made it better for the services to increase its quality or even and becomes more affordable, cheaper than it used to be. I remember about 15 to 20 years ago, to get a cell phone, we need to pay like around 10,000 riyals, which is about $3,000 just to get the line, and I'm not talking about the actual phone. So, but today, of course, it's for free. We don't pay that much. So that should give you the comparison of. So that was the most famous privatization that was done in Saudi. But if we look at the possible PPP now, that Saudi changed its whole strategy to participate with the private sector within the next decades or so. That means we're going to see more PPP projects coming into the pipeline, and I don't really have like an estimate of how much, but I would say it's going to be like huge and too much. For one reason, Saudi have reduced its capex spending significantly, and the growth in budget, if you compare it to the last 5 years, has been reduced to be only 5 to 6% a year. And that's definitely not going to allow the government to cope up, providing services to cope up with the increase, with the growth in the economy and the decrease of demand for the services. And that's where you're going to see more PPP projects coming in the pipeline, just like the Medina airport that was done with a Turkish partner. And I think we're going to see more. Many airports during the next few years are going to be not privatized. It's going to be part of a PPP plan. Usually a BTO or BOT, build, operate, and transfer. And if we compare and if you look at, or we try to understand how that's going to affect the economy, we can make a comparison to what happened in Russia. Why is Russia so relevant right now? It's very interesting when you learn right now that Saudi has been applying socialist economic policies for the past 20 years. It's like the economy fell into that trap right after the 80s when the oil prices fell at first, and it was really bad for the economy and everything else. So there were like a lot of policies that were dependent on subsidies and dependent on government-owned entities providing services and stuff. And right now, the new direction is to actually pull out most of the subsidies, or even all of it, gradually within the next few years before 2020, and rely on private sectors to actually provide those services, whether it's in partnership or even do the privatization selling. So that's what happened. Like, look at what happened in Russia, which is, I think, what's going to happen in Saudi is the same in terms of growth and or a positive effect. If you look at the chart to your right, that shows you right after doing the privatization in Russia, there was like incredible growth, a double-digit growth for many years until 2007, which I would think that would happen also in Saudi within the next 10 to 20 years, hopefully 20 years, not just 10. Of course, living standards improved, and as we know, efficiency, because when you have the private sector participating in providing services, that would make it much better than just the government providing it. If you want to look at more information about what happened in Russia, you can see at the bottom that's the article that was talking about it, and you can research it as well and see what happens. Of course, this is a really negative effect of privatization, which happened in Russia, but which is, I think, what makes Saudis more aware of the risks and the negative effects of the privatization, making them relying more on PPPs than just doing privatizing, than selling their assets. Which is the trend that I'm seeing right now, is that most of the Saudi entities, even like the leadership in Saudi, has set up a PPP center to help all of the government entities develop a PPP type of project to deal with the government and with the private sector. So the risk of having this going through privatization and selling government assets and being, trapped into under the mercy of the private sector or big tycoons and stuff, like what happened in Russia, that would be kind of a little bit, they're going to be cautious about it. But for business people like in the U.S. and Japan, it would be very important for businesses to think seriously about this, because as the days go, we see Saudis reaching out to the Asians and to Europeans. We're having like partnerships and meetings and committees, joint committees, to go through those PPP projects. But until today, I haven't seen any American joint committees that actually work with Saudis in these funds. But anyway, a PPP would be very lucrative and attractive opportunities for foreign investors to just check it out and find out what would be benefit them here. So this is for the PPP. Now we get to the point where, what about the SME? I would call it, I call this slide, or I would call this generation, or this era, is the rise of the SME. Because what happened is right after the austerity measures that the government has done, we expect, I expect as an analyst, that the contraction in the economy, I wouldn't say depression, but a contraction in the economy would make it difficult for big companies to sustain their success and sustain their market share because they have been expanding for the past 4 years, expecting the spending to continue as it's supposed to. So with the problems that is for those big companies facing, they will have to, or they will find themselves forced to reduce their business and probably even exit the market. And at that point, when the market shrinks and contracts, it would be more appropriate for SMEs to actually increase their market share or even enter the market, because it would be kind of like an open open field for them to take when most of the market players are incapable actually, or protecting their shares, or even protecting the profits and their sustainability and everything. So because we feel like they're going to fall into the trap where right after a bubble burst, because that's what happened, right after the bubble burst, things will get really difficult for them to cope up with the changes. And at the same time, there's a big support for the SMEs. A few months ago, there was an initiative, a government initiative, started with setting up a fund, and call it like a fund of PE and VC funds with a 4 billion Riyadh as capital to support PE and VC funds and encourage them to invest in VC and small companies. I'm sorry, but I can hear some. Does someone have any question or?
Yes. That's a lot of interesting information here, and I have a couple of questions here for you. The first one is, what's so different about the Saudi strategy this time? Do you think it will work?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very interesting question because, yeah, it's the strategy this time is about changing the whole policy, the whole economic policy. So when you think about it, it's so different than the others, where all of it was continuing relying on subsidies and socialist policies. But for this one, it's doing like a complete transformation with the economy, pulling all the subsidies out and putting more regulations that would support the private sector to participate. So it's completely different from the previous strategies that were just relying on the continuation of previous policies and previous regulations without doing any actual changes.
Okay. How about the health and education sectors? Do you think they will be affected by this strategy as well?
Yeah, absolutely. For those sectors, I can still see them as really attractive sectors, but because their regulations are still not, finalized already as much as the housing sector, So getting into those two sectors at the moment would be a little bit riskier than investing in the housing sector. So especially that we still have, like, for example, the healthcare. We haven't really seen what or heard what exactly the PPP model is going to be like, because that's what the new policy is going to be about, is getting the private sector involved and all.
All right, that's all the questions I have for this part.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on with the. Hold on, not yet. We're just going to close this section where we were talking about the shrinking economy, shift in policy. There's also one more aspect or factor in this for the sector, the SME, that would make it even more attractive, which is the new exchange market that Tadao just is about to start this Sunday, the 26th of February. The significant thing about this market is that it's similar to the NASDAQ, where small and medium-sized companies can actually get listed and use it to get more funding or look at cash to expand or to set up new entities there. And this is something that was, the economy was waiting for a long time, and it's going to support the SMEs to not just grow in size. It will support them, support the sector to actually increase the number of those companies and increase their participation in the GDP. I mean, as of today, the SMEs would comprise only 33% of the economy, and the goal of the vision is to increase that to go beyond 50%. And if we look at the changing industry dynamics, if you would if you have been learning about bubbles and economic cycles and everything, right now is where all of the industry dynamics are changing because of the post bubble burst stage. Of course, the industry is declining, and then at that moment, most of the industry dynamics are becoming more vulnerable to change and more possible to actually take a different route, which is what we see in the real estate sector. Right after the change in let's say the mortgage regulations and everything, and the reducing the subsidies for housing than it used to be, is actually changing the dynamics of the industry to make it more reliant on having the private sector not just building the homes, also providing the financing and mortgages and everything. And that was something really limited back in a few years, where because most of the financing was provided by the government and because it was subsidized as well. So that would actually change the dynamics of the industry. And also, one more info from what's happening right now is that because of the changes of and the whole policy and everything, the real estate developers are cannot work properly or find common grounds with, let's say, contractors or builders or manufacturers for that sector. I would say that the value chain of the real estate industry right now is trying to work together to produce the homes that are most appropriate to the Ministry of Housing applicant. So it's getting really kind of stuck for one of the SMEs or one of the entrepreneurs to find a way to penetrate it and make the industry work again. Make the wheel of, I would call it a wheel of the industry spin again. So it was, although it's like one of the challenges in the industry, it's actually an opportunity for the SMEs to penetrate that. So now we get to actually the most interesting subject, which is culture. The question that I use for that is kind of catching a little bit, because that's what, when we talk about Saudi outside, like in the U.S. or Europe or wherever, this question comes out of why women don't drive. It's not really related to women. I mean, if you look at the picture over here to the right, that's a driving license for a woman that used to drive back in the 1980s, the Eastern Province in Ras Tanura. And so that shows you that women actually were used to drive in Saudi, and they're not. There's no regulation that actually forbids them from driving. But what did really happen to make it really an interesting subject today? And let's go back a little bit and talk a little bit about the culture of Saudi. Back in the 1960s, it was quite different than nowadays. It was easier to see a woman walking around without a bias or cover, call it, and I mean Western women, and some of the locals of the Arabs probably would do that, and some of the hotels would actually put some advertisements on the newspaper saying that they would have a Christmas party or have a New Year's party, and they're advertising their services at that time. And it would be easier, it would be fine to see it back then. But what happened is that right after the austerity policy that was implemented in the 1980s, things actually changed, not financially, but culturally. The society, because most of the people were losing their jobs, were losing their pay, and so there's not much growth in the economy. There was actually depression in the economy, and it was a contraction, a big contraction. If you look at the GDP back then, it was really bad. So what happens is that people find their solace in religion and tradition. So they would think that if they go back to God or go back to their tradition or something, it would make them more comfortable to deal with the hurdles, with the hard times here that they went through back in the 80s and part of the 70s, the 80s and the 90s, until to the 2000s, by the way. After the millennium things changed, kind of like a bit. It started to change from that. So that's what happened to the society back then. Right after the austerity measures, the society has transformed into what we see today. I don't want to go into deep in there, but if you research it, if you look into it, or talk to people from here, they would tell you how there was some kind of movement, and there was lots of preachers saying that to deal with these times and hardships, it was to go back to tradition and everything. So we're kind of today in the same situation, but a little bit different. We still carry most of the cultural habits or whatever that were building up back in the 80s and 90s. We still have that, but with the changes now, but with what's happening now with the vision, it's going to be different. Of course, we understand that the culture now is more open than it was 4 years ago. And then we have the austerity measures that started in 2015. So we're not really expecting the same thing to happen like back in the 80s, because the government understands what changes requires and what transformation means. So they're taking different measures this time to actually not just do the financial transformation, but also do the cultural transformation, which is through establishing the Entertainment Authority. You probably heard about that. Like it's quite surprising for us Saudis and even for those observers out there to actually notice that the government established or set up an authority to take care of entertainment, and that's to help people find solace and comfort and different things, not just in tradition, go back to the things that it used to. So it also pulling out the subsidies and changing the economic policies. This is going to have like a really great effect on people and culture, because when you because what's happening right now is that the government is taking the let's say the agency or with let's say the responsibility to make the decision from the government to the individual or to the family. So because subsidy is not going to be available to everyone, it's going to be available to the needy, and those subsidies are going to be in cash. So when you give those Saudis the cash, they will make the decision themselves whether to spend it on gasoline or utilities and stuff, or use it as savings and build their savings and investments. But the government won't, it's not going to get involved in making decisions for the people again, because providing subsidies to everyone and monopolize the services is like making decisions for everybody else. So, and having the private sector participating, that would also, transfer the agency or transfer the responsibility to change the decision to the people or to the individual. And so what we're expecting, like increasing prices right after pulling the subsidies, prices are going to increase in the next few years, actually the next few months. So when they increase, it's not that the government is going to let women drive, it's the people who are going to ask the government to actually let their women drive, because they can't afford paying for drivers to drive the women around, and because they will feel the pressure of increasing expenses, increasing costs for living conditions and everything, that then they will make the right decisions that makes more sense than just having the government make decisions. So this, just to cover the culture, I'll show you, this is one of the cartoons, it's very my favorite. It shows you what women and men, Saudi men and women, think about when they get married, just like Americans, just like Europeans, they're just normal people. Probably they have similar needs. They're just people like everyone else. Actually, women is. So, yeah. Do you have any questions before we move on to the next one?
Yes, we do have a question from the audience. Kara is wondering, as an American, Kara is interested to know what sectors do you think would be most lucrative to invest in?
Well, I would say that housing would be the most lucrative at the moment, because it's like whether it's using the debt market, buying sukuk, or setting up companies, building companies, or even design, building design or architecture designing all of that. That would be the most at the moment, because that's for today, but 6 months, some of the stuff might change, and we have more sectors joining the housing into that.
Okay, and back to the culture part, how do you think the vision is going to help in shaping or change the Saudi culture?
Yeah, well, you just like covered this like a moment ago with the Entertainment Authority, but let me just emphasize on pulling the subsidies out and shifting to a capitalist economic policy. That would make, pulling out the subsidies will let the price increase. Utilities and cost of living would increase, just like what I said a moment ago, but it will make people think, carefully about whether to think approve what everybody else think about, or not agreeing with women driving, for example, or there are some other complicated stuff in the culture as well too. But yeah, they would take out or make the Saudi individual think for himself more than just thinking of conforming with the society. Yeah.
All right. That's all the questions we have for this part.
Beautiful. All right, then let me show you something about expats and Saudi. So those are a couple of my friends here that the Europeans. I wouldn't say their names. I'm not sure if they're actually, some of them actually is with us here at the webinar, but as you can see, they're like having camel milk and enjoying the company of some, I would call camel boys, not cowboys. That's what they were. And if that's the white thing, that's a camel milk, and the one next to it, that's dates. That's like a fresh date, just like from the farms over there. That was one of the trips. This is from Diane Saleh, and if you notice, not all women here get really fully covered. And this part, one of the historical parts in Saudi, and it's very interesting. Looks like the tombs or those places in Petra in Jordan, and it's very interesting. When we went there, the weather was really nice, and it was quite interesting to see how some of the culture, some of the history was there. Some of it even from the Roman, times. Like this one at the left here, they say that it used to be a club or a temple. I don't remember exactly, but the guide was telling us some information about it. And the one to the right, that's a tomb. One of it has some languages, some statues that goes back really before 1,000 years, for 1,000 years, or even older than that. And this is the edge of the world. This is one of the most famous parts of Saudi. As you can see, it's all it's all yellow, but it's a very interesting place. It's beautiful during the winter, but it's really hot during the summer. But it looks really fun. Look at them; they're having so much fun. Some of the people here, the picture are actually Americans. They can walk freely and see the place and enjoy it. And those some of my favorite friends. We went to my hometown, Gelato, and they talked to some of the Saudis and visited some of the old clay houses, really interesting places. And I always laugh when I look at the pictures we write. It's really funny. And and that's the guy in the picture. As you can see, the Saudis are really fine talking to women or dealing with that. It's not like some of the media say. Of course, some of the Saudis really have different attitude, but in general, it's joyful experience for the expense. So we get to the end, but before we get there, do we have any questions before we?
Yes, it's interesting to bring the topic about expats, and following combined with the culture part, do you feel like female expats will be treated differently from local female citizens?
Actually, they would. I'm not sure I would be able to, answer that properly. But I didn't see like anything, any different treatment. But if you would want to more elaboration on that, I think if one of our friends, Kara, the one who asked the question, if
Yes.
she would be able to speak about this stuff for 5 minutes, it would be, or a few minutes, it would be great. Can we give her the mic?
Yeah, one last question. We all know Saudi is big with expats, and we all know also that more and more Americans will come to Saudi as expats. What kind of recommendation would you give to those young people when they come to Saudi?
Well, it's great. I mean, if they find an opportunity to come to Saudi, they would just, I would, advise them to just go ahead and take it. It's quite an experience, whether you spend 3 months or you spend 3 years or 6 years. And you might, I mean, it might not be like a full, enjoyable place to live at the moment. I mean, if you read, there are some articles about how difficult to also to live in Saudi, but for some other people, they find it really interesting to live here, especially if you're thinking about the business opportunities, because that would be the most motive, most interesting motivation or important motivation for a person, for Americans to be in Saudi, is to come here for business, and everything else would be an extra. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all the question we have for today.
Yeah. Well, if we would, I mean, if Karen would be, willing to share with us some of her insights about Saudi, would be great if we can have her.
We'll try to see if we can give her the mic.
Yeah.
Kara, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can.
Fantastic. How about directing your question directly to Mohammed, if that's okay?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So Mohammed is a good friend of mine. I spent 2 years in Riyadh, and so I am familiar in some ways with what is happening there with the vision, and just excited to hear further from Mohammed, just from experience it firsthand. But one question I just did have, Mohammed, regarding the cultural aspect. Are you concerned that the cultural heritage will be lost through all of this modernization of society? And what planning have you seen within the government to work around this? Because I do think that it is one of the best preserved, just ancient and historic cultures that still remains in the world. And so I think this definitely needs to be a point of focus as the country and the society seeks to modernize.
Gotcha. Well, I would answer that, but if you just promise you to stay on, just say just 1 or 2 minutes about your experience in Saudi, like short summary. But to answer your question, of course, they're concerned about protecting the heritage, protecting the historical sites. Of course, it's part of the vision, it's part of the NCP 2020. We actually have a dedicated section of government to follow and to make sure that culture and heritage and tradition, especially the good tradition, would be preserved and continue with us for the next decade or two. So.
Okay, great.
So yeah, tell us. Answer that question about how women, like local and Western women, will be treated. Like, are they treated differently or the same, or what's it like?
Okay. I mean, I think that there is definitely you are treated differently. I think the question was if a Western woman would be treated differently than a local woman. I believe that was it. And just from the historical how intact the culture is, historical ties, there is definitely, there is much more gender segregation than someone in the West would ever come in contact with. But I think that you have to look at that from a historical context, and then that gives a lot more understanding, and then it's not maybe as it's not as harsh maybe as we would recognize it initially from a Western standpoint. But being from the West, you definitely, so to say, you would get away with a lot more things than a local Saudi woman would. And not saying that you're trying to break rules, but pretty much that you don't understand the way that society works, and so you're not sure what is what's okay and what's not okay. And I would say that the Saudis on the whole are very gracious to that, because as in any society, there are places that each members of society belong and don't belong, and that can be a little tricky to learn in Saudi. But I would say that you're given a lot more grace. I think expats as a whole are given a lot more grace than local Saudis, because it's very visible that we don't necessarily fit in, and that we're not from there, and that we're not aware. So I would say yes, that definitely you are treated differently, but you are also still held to to those cultural norms in some ways. And as a guest in that country, you do want to respect that. But I think that if for any Americans that would be interested in going there, I thoroughly enjoyed 2 years that I was there. It was challenging. It was quite challenging, but I gained significantly. And it's just, especially right now, there's so many changes going on that I don't think that anyone could go and not gain just extensive experience and knowledge in a developing place. It's a pretty exciting environment right now. So yeah, I hope that kind of answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, really. That was fantastic to hear. And because hearing perspective from an American that's been to Saudi, that would really fantastic. That would be really good. I mean, there are a lot of other perspectives also if we all look at search or Google it on the internet. Of course, part of it is negative, part of it is positive, but that's what it is. That's what it looks like. So the most important thing about this presentation is that look through the vision and looking at the business opportunities and the potential transformation in the country. It's not just financial or economic; it's also cultural transformation expected for the next decade or so. So this is my information. If you would like to reach out, let me just emphasize on one thing, that most of the stuff that we discussed today was all my analysis. There was no statements of whatsoever for what I've shared with you today. It's completely part of my analysis and my observation for what's happening in Saudi, or what's the business opportunity. So it's in no way it's a recommendation to invest in Saudi, or it's a way to promote some kind of opportunities or something. So I'm just this moment is find it's really interesting and it's really helpful to share these information, share this analysis with the community, the Bryant community, because what I've gained from the university was, the time that I had in Rhode Island and Bryant was really fruitful and helpful and joyful, and I would say great that it actually not just helped me get jobs, or just it also built me in my personal trait, personal character and stuff, and helped me become the next what I have been doing here. we reached the end of this webinar, and I'll just hand over the mic to Tim and Vince.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mohammed. This was such a fantastic presentation, and I'd like to thank Vince, and I'd like to thank Kara for taking the mic for a little bit. That was fantastic. But most of all, I'd like to thank the rest of you for joining us this morning. Again, look for that survey in your email. This concludes today's webinar, and have a great rest of the day, everybody. Thanks a lot.